Celebrating 42 seasons on the air, Farmweek is a production of Mississippi State University Extension. Today on Farmweek, China freezes pork shipments from Canada. But an expert tells Farmweek the drug they found in the meat isn't dangerous. Plus, a turf war over ethanol has senators writing nasty notes to the president. In Southern gardening, call it cheerful, call it bubbly, everything's pretty and pink. And as if farmers didn't have enough troubles, labor disputes can turn markets upside down too. Farmweek starts right now.
Hello everybody, I'm Mike Russell. Thanks for joining us today on Farm Week. A lot happening this week, a lot of letters being written by lawmakers. Let's get to it. First, the president had hoped to have the USMCA passed by now, but politics still in the way. Members of a Democrat coalition recently wrote a letter to the USTR, Robert Lighthizer. He had submitted a draft document required to inch the USMCA forward. The coalition, on the other hand, wrote a few days ago, quote, "We were troubled that you sent up the draft on May 30th without sufficient consultation and strongly urge you not to make the same mistake twice." NAFTA 2.0 apparently has a long way to go before ratification. Politico was reporting that Canadian producers were stunned by China's decision to freeze imports after they found traces of an animal drug called ractopamine in Canadian pork. That drug is banned in China, but still in use elsewhere, including all three NAFTA countries. Dr. Carla Houston at Mississippi State says ractopamine, when used properly, is perfectly safe.
Basically what it does is it puts more of their growth into muscle instead of fat, so it helps them grow better and gain weight. Ractopamine is approved in the United States in cattle and swine, and it's usually fed in the last couple weeks before an animal's harvested, prior to harvest. It has a very short half-life. In other words, if we remove them from ractopamine within a couple days, it's considered a drug. It's completely out of their system. Experimentally, maybe use in other dosages or in other methods or in other time frames may have caused adverse reactions, but as it's labeled here in the U.S., using ractopamine according to label in cattle and swine is safe.
More letters to Congress. In a sharply worded letter to the president, a dozen U.S. senators said they want Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue to back away from any influence over petitions for ethanol waivers from small oil refineries, as required, they say, by law. In their letter, they wrote, quote, "We strongly oppose giving the Secretary any role in the decision-making process over the petitions. We would view any decisions to further delay, reduce, or deny hardship relief to small refineries as the result of the Secretary of Agriculture's impermissible interference. We are confident that others, including the federal courts, would do the same." Here's Peter Tubbs with more.
A turf war has broken out in Congress over who has input over issuing small refiners exemptions, or SREs, that are issued by the Environmental Protection Agency. A dozen senators from oil-producing states sent a letter to the White House arguing that Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue's involvement in the SRE issue is potentially illegal. The Clean Air Act authorizes only the administrator, in consultation with the Secretary of Energy, to act on petitions from small refineries.
Thank you very much, Iowa. We love Iowa. Thank you very much.
The White House appeared ready to dial back the exemptions after an appearance by President Trump at a June 11th ethanol plant event in Iowa. Major oil refiners like Chevron and ExxonMobil have received flack for gaining SREs to cover their smallest refineries. The ethanol industry has been pressing both Secretary Perdue and President Trump to stop issuing exemptions as it reduces the demand for ethanol. Oil interests want an increase in the exemptions, claiming that requiring the blending of ethanol into gasoline puts small refineries at economic risk when margins are tight. According to Emily Score, CEO of the ethanol trade association Growth Energy, the issuing of small refinery exemptions has reduced ethanol consumption by 2.6 billion gallons. Speculation the Trump administration will reduce the number of SRE waivers has driven the price of renewable identification numbers, or RINs, higher. 1 RIN is generated for each gallon of biofuels that is created. RINs can be purchased by crude oil refiners to allow them the ability to eliminate their obligation to mix ethanol into their output of the nation's gasoline supply.
In our continuing coverage of meat labeling, a new development, the Plant-Based Food Association is suing Mississippi, stating that its new law preventing the labeling of products as meat if they're not derived from animals violates free speech. Mississippi's Ag Secretary Andy Gibson, named in the lawsuit, reacted to intense social media pressure with this tweet. He said, quote, "For all the misinformation spread about Mississippi's new meat labeling law, one look at the law itself puts the debate to rest. The First Amendment does not grant anyone a right to lie about the nature of food products they sell to the consuming public." In a separate statement, he wrote, quote, "A food product made of insect protein should not be deceptively labeled as beef. Someone looking to purchase tofu should not be tricked into buying lab-grown animal protein. Words mean something. We look forward to defending the law to make sure Mississippi consumers have clear information on the meat and non-meat products they purchase. We'll follow up." On the lighter side, almost every part of the U.S. has a unique claim to fame in its landscape: aspens in the Rockies, maples in New England, palm trees at the coast. But what's the South famous for? Here's a hint. It looks like a big bouquet of flowers. Here's Amy Myers.
The crepe myrtle has become the center of Southern culture for Natchez, and with over 10,000 trees, it's really to witness it in full bloom is quite amazing. It's a great place to come visit.
And what better way to celebrate Southern tradition than mixing education with a little fun? Here we are at the very first Natchez Crepe Myrtle Festival. The blooming spectacle kicked off with a downtown stroll.
We had over 80 people attend last night's crepe crawl, where guests came in and walked around town and had opportunities to eat at numerous local restaurants. And today there was lessons on crepe myrtle care.
Extension specialists, master gardeners, and even a historian were on hand with a litany of knowledge and demonstrations.
The one main thing we were hoping to learn was the pruning of the crepe myrtles. We have some old crepe myrtles in our town, and they have been neglected or crepe murdered, and we need to get them back in shape.
I spoke to the visitor about how to treat a crepe myrtle tree, the proper way of doing it, to inject it, how to prove it in the ground. The master gardener took care of just about every tree in Natchez.
Along with proper maintenance, visitors learned what to do if they face the dreaded insect pest crepe myrtle bark scale.
Don't despair. We do have some effective treatments, and they're easy to apply. You just mix them up and apply them as a liquid around the roots of the tree.
After the workshops wrapped up, visitors explored the grounds of historic homes, Auburn and Monmouth. As the day came to a close, folks walked away with a better appreciation for the crepe myrtle and what it means to Southern culture. They also gained practical knowledge for making sure this Southern landscape staple lives on for many years to come. From Natchez, Mississippi, I'm Amy Myers reporting.
Thanks, Amy. So what's that old saying? Pink isn't just a color, it's an attitude. In Southern Gardening this week, Gary Bachman says pink is bright, vibrant, fun, and perfect for your landscape. Everything he says is pretty in pink. Here's Gary.
One of the most cheerful flower colors that can be grown in any home garden and landscape is pink. Now you may be thinking, I'm going to be sharing Vista Bubblegum Supertunia. That's a good one, but not today. Let's take a look at a few plants that produce flowers that are pretty in pink. Magellan pink zinnia are simply joyful, and they illuminate any landscape. I love the fact that these plants are packed with numerous fully double 5 to 6 inch flowers that beam with bright pink petals. Superbena's Sparkling Rosé is a fantastic verbena selection. This plant produces large flower clusters of soft pink on the outside petals and the deep ruby in the center. The flowers completely cover the canopy of dark green, powdery mildew-resistant foliage all summer without deadheading. Fireworks Gomphrena has been an outstanding garden performer since being named a Mississippi Medallion winner in 2010. It's covered with iridescent, hot pink flowers whose bright yellow tips give the appearance of a never-ending show of exploding fireworks. Angelonia are called summer snapdragons. Serenita Pink was named an All-America Selection winner in 2014. This is one of my favorites from the Serenita series and have pink flower spikes on a compact growing plant, only about 14 inches tall. I believe if you grow any of these plants, your garden will be the belle of the ball and pretty in pink. I'm horticulturist Gary Bachman, and I'll see you next time on Southern Gardening.
Moving on to the markets, a lot of questions being asked by people in every corner of the country. Every report that comes out, combined with some of the politics in corn that we talked about earlier in the show, have producers bearish and bullish, depending on their location. Analyst Don Rose takes a look.
Well, I think what you really have in the U.S. is you have a domestic issue. There's no shortage of grain or no shortage of corn in the world market. It's really domestic only. And so what that means is you're going to have regional shortages of corn, particularly over in the eastern corn belt. You know, we have 70-cent overs already at some of these ethanol plants. And what happens with the market, typically you push up, we're going to have dislocated corn that you're going to have to try and pull from all different regions. It's really going to be an eastern corn belt versus a western corn belt dislocation. But you're also going to have dislocations in the western corn belt. You get into some of these synergies in the South Dakota, you know, in that region, you're going to run into the same issues. So from a producer standpoint, that means there's going to be opportunities to watch the basis, get some good pushes as you go through the year, but you have to have some risk management on to take advantage of those, because it may not be, it may be in the cash market and the basis versus the board. We talk the futures market a lot, but it all comes back down to the cash market and the basis. If you stop and look at it in the last report, the overall planted acres from last year were actually down 10.4 million acres. So we've lost a lot of acres. Where did they go? 4.6 million came out of soybeans, 1.1 million came out of corn, and you know, realistically, you're probably, history shows that you don't drop these acres, those big numbers going into the final, more like 2 to 3 million on corn, I would say, an extra, maybe another 2 million on soybeans, so there's another 4 or 5 million. So there you go, those are the acres. 10 million prevent plant acres, not that far off when you add everything up. But not just corn prevent plant acres, it's prevent plant acres on total crops, I think, is what you're really looking at, you know, counting the soybeans and everything else.
Time for today's trivia quiz, especially apropos for where we find ourselves with China these days. We hear a lot about the Chinese market. It's a good-sized country, roughly the same size physically as the U.S. The population's a little different, though, so today's question, what is the population of China? Is it A, 300 million, B, 500 million, C, 1 billion, or D, 1.4 billion? We'll have the answer coming up. We'll take a break right here, but don't go away. Coming up on our Farm Week feature, global trade is complex. We're seeing it now. Markets years in the making can evaporate over a misinterpreted word or a labor dispute. One port in California is the busiest in the country by volume. There, not long ago, the hay industry weathered just such a dispute, taking a decisive hit in several states. That's coming up on Farm Week. Don't go away.
At Mississippi State University, Extension is reaching beyond the college campus and impacting adult education. We're instructing agricultural professionals on the latest trends in research and technology, inspiring communities, empowering small businesses, and promoting the growth of healthy families where youth and adults can reach their fullest potential.
The MSU Extension Service, sharing our vision for the future.
Before we get back to the market report, let's take a look at the Farm Week calendar. Just one item, but it's important, the Thad Cochran Agricultural Leadership Program. The application deadline is July 31st. This is an amazing opportunity for selected early career producers and allied ag professionals. A 2-year program that includes 9 multi-day seminars, about 35 days of intensive instruction on economic literacy, community decision-making, and legislative policy making over those 35 days. There will also be an international trip. Again, the application deadline is July 31st, and candidate interviews will start in early August. If you'd like to know more about this extraordinary program, call Dr. Michael Newman at 662-325-2960, or on the web, visit extension.msstate.edu/TCALP, the Thad Cochran Agricultural Leadership Program. Now check out this week's Farm Week Snapshot. Over the years, especially since the farm crisis of the early 80s, farmers and ranchers have faced ever-increasing uncertainty. This year, thanks to what many have described as a perfect storm, that uncertainty means that things are more complicated than ever. Ag economist Keith Coble gives us a few reasons why. Keith, this has been such a bizarre year in so many ways when it comes to ag. From your opinion as an ag economist, why is 2019 so complicated when it comes to farm program participation?
Well, a lot of things have come together at one time. For starters, just before Christmas, we passed a new farm bill, and we are now in the process. USDA is getting ready to implement that bill, so there's going to be a lot of questions related to that. Secondly, we have just enacted disaster legislation because of bad weather experience and hurricanes, and also we're entering the second year of trade battle with China and market compensation payments for farmers because of that trade battle.
There's also a second round of market facilitation payments, and that's been announced. Is it radically different than last year's program?
It's going to be, but we don't know the details yet, and that's what makes folks a little bit nervous right now. The big thing that we are seeing is that the payments will be across all program crop commodities and at the same level, and they will be county specific. So every program crop acre that is eligible in a county will get the same dollar amount. That's quite different last year when there was a very high payment on soybean acres and much lower for several other crops as well. Producers right now need to be thinking about that potentially to get the market facilitation payments, they may need to plant some kind of a cover crop on that ground to be eligible for the market facilitation payments. So if you were prevented from planting this year, there are some provisions there that a lot of people are asking questions about right now.
Back to the trivia quiz now as we wrap up. Today's question was, what is the population of China? Is it 300 million, 500 million, 1 billion, or 1.4 billion? Well, China is about the same size as the U.S. physically, but its population is more than 4 times the size. So D is the answer. 1.4 billion people live in China. Is it any wonder that American agriculture is aching for access? And by the way, the population of China's capital city, Beijing, is more than 24 million, 3 times the size of our largest city, New York, at 8.6 million. We talked about it earlier. Prevent plant acres eligible for the next round of trade aid if farmers planted a cover crop. Grain farmers welcomed the relief. The loss of markets can also happen through trade or labor disputes. A few years ago, Western hay growers got caught up in a dockside dispute that eventually devastated their markets.
In the summer of 2014, West Coast hay producers were well into their harvest season when contract negotiations between port workers and ship owners fell apart. For those growing alfalfa and other hay varieties for export, news of closures and labor slowdowns at 29 ports along the West Coast had producers listening carefully.
Indeed, even a financial hit for some companies, but on the macro sort of level where we look at the winners and the losers, overall it doesn't really mean all that much for the U.S. economy, or even here in Southern California.
Those growing hay for export disagree with assessments that downplayed the impact of the 9-month labor dispute. By then, many forage producers in California, Washington, and Oregon had taken a major financial hit, particularly those trying to get their products to international buyers in Asia and elsewhere.
That was a very difficult time for exporters here in the Imperial Valley or anywhere on the West Coast. We couldn't ship anything out. We had standing orders.
Marcel Van Dyke, marketing manager for the Port of Los Angeles, said the resulting congestion at the ports was especially hard for those with hay or other perishable products.
Some you cannot store too long, or it is very expensive to store in cold storage. If you cannot ship it to the market, quality deteriorates, and then you don't get your premium price in the foreign market. So it is very hard for the supply chain to deal with those disruptions.
Golden Eagle Hay, a Calipatria, California-based grower, began exporting alfalfa pellets out of the Imperial Valley in 1963, long before many other producers in the area. By 1980, the company had shifted to bales compressed for transport in shipping containers. Today, many others have joined them in trying to supply the Asian market with forage. John Berker, Golden Eagle's general manager, says some of their longtime customers had to turn elsewhere when the company, which now buys 80% of the hay it sells, was unable to get animal feed delivered on time because of labor disputes at the port.
So we were not able to ship over there to Japan. This is just one example for Japan. So the cattle and the dairy cows have to eat. So what Japan did was they went and bought Timothy from Canada and Australia and oat hay instead because they had to feed their animals.
Those in the hay export business were suddenly stuck storing the old hay crop as the new season approached. Some turned to nearby dairies and horse ranches, matching or undercutting domestic prices in hopes of emptying their storage sheds. According to USDA, hay prices across the country dropped by 25% between 2014 and 2016, with steeper declines along the West Coast. Those who grew primarily for domestic customers also began to feel the pinch as the market flooded with hay originally bound for other ports of call.
Well, anytime you have an oversupply, you know the price will drop. Domestic dairymen, any cattle guy, they're pretty smart. And if they have offers for cheap fiber, they'll change their menu or change their ration.
The same scenario was playing out farther north in Washington and Oregon, where the ports were affected by the same labor negotiations. Hay exporters were reluctant to use truck or rail due to the slower delivery time that could leave customers waiting in Asia with a dwindling feed supply. The labor dispute was finally settled in February of 2015, but the ports needed several months to return to business as usual. While Golden Eagle weathered the storm, in part because of major customers from Japan and Taiwan who remained loyal, it took much longer for hay prices to rebound.
But at least we had a home for it. A lot of guys didn't have a home for it. They didn't have the relationships that we have, that we've built over 20 years.
Still, U.S. hay exports have continued to show signs of growth as some customers return to their original suppliers. A decision in Saudi Arabia to phase out forage production to cut water consumption is expected to continue driving demand. One Saudi Arabian company went so far as to buy land in the Imperial Valley to grow its own hay.
The traditional markets were always Japan and Korea, because they still have cows and all the other animals there, but they didn't have enough land to cultivate food for them. But you see now also more the Middle East is coming up.
An unusual agreement to extend the new labor contracts at West Coast ports from 2019 to mid-2022 may have contributed to overseas customers having increased confidence in U.S. producers.
Most of that cargo is coming back after the actions are winding down, and now with an extension of the contract, that gives a lot of trust in the West Coast again.
Despite the good news, the major hay exporters working 200 miles away in the Imperial Valley are unwilling to get caught in the middle again. Most are making contingency plans.
It was definitely a difficult time. This one hurt. It really did.
That was Colleen Bradford Krantz reporting. No question, farmers and ranchers can be hurt on any number of fronts. And they're not the only ones. Next week, part 4 of our series, Back to the Farm, a story of one family's journey from the city to the farm instead of the other way around. But after a year with cities growing and rural America shrinking, it feels like an exodus, with small towns able to attract fewer people and customers. Everyone seems to be doing more with less. How's the family holding up? That's next time on Farm Week. Remember, if you missed a story, look for past episodes of Farm Week on our website at farmweek.tv. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube as well. We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching.